Here we
All right,
go.
sweet.
I'm going to put in the chat right now instructions for everyone. If you all could introduce yourself via the chat, since I think more people join us, and just tell us where you're. I'm going to mute everyone. Tell us your name, where you're hosting a seder, and if you have some questions, if you put them in there now, then the people that are sharing it with us might be able to answer them along the way. Yay, Hannah. This is really exciting for me because just for context for everyone else, I used to be in New Orleans, and Hannah and I used to lead a seder together there. And now I moved to Philadelphia, but it's really fun. It's been really fun to be able to talk about this all with Hannah. Hi, Zoe.
Hi there.
Welcome. Hi, Jill. If you all want to introduce yourself in the chat, tell us your name, where you're hosting a seder, and if you have any questions that you're wanting us to answer along the way, we can put them over there and get a little docket started.
Okay, great. So I'm Jill Charney. I'm from the Boston JVP chapter, and we are not doing a Seder this year, but I am getting myself prepared to be ready for this for next year.
Oh, cool. We have someone from Neshamat Shum. Welcome. Oh, yeah, Randy, you came onto I met you on one of the network calls before. I remember now. Cool. Great. Well, let's maybe give a couple more seconds. But Linda, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and maybe start going into some background if folks come in?
Sure.
When we get a critical mass.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Linda Holtzen. I'm a rabbi. I'm in Philadelphia, and I'm very excited about a seder we're doing in Philly this year because I work with a Havurah, with a group that does programming together, and we and Philly JVP and CARE, the organization that works for the rights of Muslims, we're working together to do a seder on Palestinian liberation, which is feeling exciting. So there's good stuff happening. So, it's interesting because I'm supposed to be doing something kind of background on Pesach, and that could take months because Pesach is a really rich, really beautiful, really wonderful holiday, and I could go in any direction at all. So I'm looking at a couple things to just get us started, and if people have questions and you'd like me to answer any of your questions, I'm happy to. More than any other Jewish holiday, I think that Pesach is taken seriously. Passover, Pesach, you can call it the Hebrew or the English, is taken seriously by a really, really wide range of Jews, right? That the themes of Passover seem to speak to so many different people who are secular, people who are religious. This holiday, more than any other, just speaks to so many. And the themes that jump out at me when I think about why are themes of slavery and depression, and what does it mean? And what does it mean to start a new life after realizing that you've suffered from some oppression and you need to find a way to journey out? The theme of liberation, and that's why this story, the Exodus story on which Passover is based, has been taken up by so many different people and used as the paradigm of liberation story. Pesach works if you're considering what it means to be at the start of a long and challenging journey, right? That we often think that the Israelites, like that the hard part already happened, but the hard part is yet to come. And both in the myth, where the Israelites are going to wander for 40 years in the desert, until to us, to trying to figure out how to be people who are not being treated as just an oppressed minority, but who have in the world some power, how to handle that power. And what does that mean? And how can we move ahead in a way that's just and that's reasonable and dealing with the power that we now have? For the Israelites leaving ancient Egypt, leaving Mitzrayim, which is the Hebrew name, which really means the narrow places, right? They moved from the narrow places out into the expansiveness of the desert. It was the beginnings of the community, and it was the start of a Jewish community, and trying to figure that out. That's really tempting to jump into around Passover. Questions of leadership and challenges to leadership. For Moses and for Aaron and for even Miriam in some way, being a leader of the Israelite people was incredibly difficult. And we Jews have an interesting and complicated relationship with leadership in general. And certainly in the land of Israel, it's a very complicated relationship with leadership. But for all of us, wherever we are, trying to accept people as leaders and to understand who can be a worthy leader and in what ways are we leaders and how can we claim our power as leaders, it's that story that's about to be told. The questions of risks and the needs involved with speaking truth to power, how one does those things. My favorite story around the Exodus and the Israelites leaving ancient Egypt is them standing at the water, and Moses is standing there with his staff, and they're waiting to cross the sea, and nothing is happening at all. And suddenly one person says, "I know the way," and takes one footstep into the water, and that's it. From then on, everything is ready to work and everything can happen. And for me, I see all of us as those people who are trying to figure out when we should put our feet in the water and trust that the seas are going to part, and when you need to wait a little bit and not put your feet in the water. And Passover is about that question. Passover is about the different perspectives we bring to understanding life and the validity of all those perspectives. It's about how we see our lives and our worlds and our place in the world from a wide array of viewpoints, and how can we respect all of those views. It's a holiday that brings us back, if we wanted to the mythic start of the Jewish people. It's a holiday that brings us into springtime and how to celebrate spring rituals. One tradition around Passover is that we sing Song of Songs, which is the book in the Bible that is the ultimate love nature song and is really quite beautiful and is all about Passover. And it's also about reaching out to youth and looking back at our ancestors. One custom that I always love is that when we hide an afikomen, when we hide this piece of matzah, if we allow the children to find it, that once they find it, we can actually conclude our seder. And if they don't find it, we can't, because we're saying, the world is really going to be moving into your hands and we need to trust you. So it's all about movement from past to present to future. So those are just a list of themes that jump out at me as background to what Passover is. And then my question is, so what's our process? If you're interested in exploring Passover and in really figuring out how to make those themes come to life for yourself or your JVP community in a seder, I would start by looking at as many Haggadahs as you can get your hands on and reading the table of contents. Like the Passover Haggadah is one of the few places in the world where we actually sing the table of contents in some seders, where you go through from beginning to end just singing the words, because each piece of it adds a little bit of one of the themes that I've already mentioned. And seeing what underlies each piece of that table of contents, and how you can bring the gift of that theme that jumps out, is a really wonderful way to start and to really walk into Passover. And then a few ways to focus on the overall story. One place to start is by noticing that while Moses isn't actually mentioned in the Haggadah, he's certainly very prominent in the story of the Exodus, and that when he comes into the position of leadership of the Israelite people as they start to leave ancient Egypt, we realize that he is an incredibly complicated person. Right? He has one foot in the palace because he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter, and he has one foot in with the Israelite people because he was born into the Israelite people. So he is someone who understands how to work with the powerful, and he's someone who strongly identifies with the people who are oppressed. And for him, that's what makes this work. That's what makes this story happen. And I think for all of us, when we start to think as we reach Passover, where are we? How can we understand the people in power well enough to actually make a difference, strategize, use our knowledge well? And how can we try to be there to hear the words of people who are oppressed, whether we're doing work on Israel, Palestine, or other work around groups that are oppressed? How can we reach out and be present? Because if we're not keeping an ear on both, we're not going to be really effective. And that's something that Moses manages to do. Second is around Passover, thinking about how do we do all of this? Like, where do we get the strength and ability to move ahead when we're frightened or when we're vulnerable? And a lot of the Haggadah leads us into moments where we can say, oh, I can look at all the different ways that the 4 children, when you've read that in the Haggadah ever, see the world, and I can figure out the ways that I'm vulnerable and the ways that things are difficult or challenging for me, and I can figure out how I can help myself move from here to where I need to go. Or how can we know where we're going? Like when we cross the sea and are standing there ready to move, how in the world do we know where we're trying to get to? And that's a huge question that we ask ourselves when we reach Passover. And finally, the Israelites are walking toward what was seen as freedom. And it's incredibly complicated, the understanding of freedom and what that's about. And we're walking towards what was experienced by them as somehow a promised land. And for lots of us, the notion of a promised land is the least appealing part of this story and the most challenging part of this story, because there isn't a land that's promised to a people. There is land, and land is not owned by people. Land is lived on by people. Land is loved by people. There isn't a group that can walk in from outside and claim a land as promised in any way to them. So when we look at that story, and we're here in the world of modern Israel-Palestine, we see the incredible challenges and the difficulties and the pain that's been caused by that very notion of the promised land. And my question when I reach Passover is, what do we do with it? How can we understand a sense of a journey that's moving towards someplace that's beautiful and that's good and that we care about, but that's not promised to us by some outside force that we don't have the right to walk in and take away from any other people? So the end point of the seder is a really difficult piece around this. The last words in a traditional seder are the words, Bashana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. So after we've walked through and after we've explored and after we've questioned ourselves and after we've looked at our vulnerability and we've gone through all of these stages and we've reached out to the older people, the younger people, the everybody, we reached the words next year in Jerusalem. And what in the world do we do with those words? Like, those words are so challenging because it can feel as if what we're saying is all of this leads up to us taking over Jerusalem. And that, for me, makes the entire rest of the Seder impossible. If I need to say those words and mean that, then I can't say any of the rest of it, because then it means that all this other work that I've been talking about is not work that I've been doing in an honest and fair and just way. So I would recommend a couple different possibilities. I would recommend that when we get to the end, those of us who really love a metaphor can use this